my dears, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about how disability made learning to sing impossibly difficult for me and how I figured it out anyway because I am way too stubborn for my own good. But first, if you're new here, hi there, hello, my name is Sydney. I use they, them pronouns. I am an openly queer, disabled, autistic, trans, non-binary actor, composer, educator, and disability advocate. I'm currently working on a thesis about disability education, media, theater, performance, accessible education, and basically anything else in any and all of those categories, and it's culminating in the world's first all-nerdy virgin cast and crew production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You can learn all about that at the links in my description, and I'm also a white person in my early 20s with light brown curly hair that's in a ponytail, and I am wearing a red plaid dress, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf. Also, I keep forgetting to say this, but you're welcome to like, comment, subscribe, whatever brings you joy, but no pressure. Gotta throw those things out there, otherwise people forget. Also, since it's pertinent to the topic of the video, I have like 35 different diagnoses at this point, and they all intertwine to make me the unique disaster that I am. The major ones are severe irritable bowel syndrome, chronic migraines, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a dysautonomic disorder that means my blood pressure and some other stuff is pretty wonky, and before I had it under control, it'd make me pass out a lot, which in regards to singing, issues. Chronic fatigue, dyspraxia, which means my motor control is difficult, autism, auditory processing disorder, speech impediment called cluttering, and also I have non-Tourette's tics. And I also had a brain injury situation 3 years ago that almost killed me and resulted in memory loss. So yeah, most of these things I don't even think about anymore because I've had them my whole life, and I don't know any different, or I've had them all after brain damage, so I don't know any different. And I have most of them completely under control, but growing up, since my body was changing so much all the time, I was a bit of a disaster because having a hard time regulating your blood pressure, having bowels that don't like to work, and having a rough time controlling my body at all times while my body is changing size and proportions regularly, and also having zero of these things diagnosed made me an entire mess. Really glad I have it all figured out now because whew, that was a time. But anyway, I started semi-professionally singing when I was in 6th grade. That context is also important. I also want to preface this by saying that my vocal journey is nowhere near done. I guarantee you that I'm going to watch this back in a few months or even a few weeks and go, like, look at the examples I show you, and I'm gonna be like, I can do so much better than that now as my voice continues to refine, but I do feel like I can very comfortably teach technique at this point and how disability relates to that. And you wouldn't think that disability would relate this much to singing, but it has truly made everything way harder than expected, and has also been the missing piece of why none of the techniques that I was taught ever really worked right, and I got so frustrated in formal settings. But anyway, I'm gonna stop stalling. We're gonna go through my vocal journey and what I learned along the way. I think that I have videos and or recordings strewn about from the past however many years that I will put in as they fit. And then after, I will talk you through some of the other pieces of advice and skills and whatnot that have helped me to be the best vocalist that I can be. Because, spoiler alert, just like literally everything else in life, I don't learn in formal education settings, and I had to backwards train myself to the same level of education somebody would have gotten formally, so. Great. All right, so I grew up in a very musical household, listened to a lot of ABBA, a lot of John Denver, a lot of old Broadway musicals and Golden Age Hollywood movie musicals. I used to put on concerts for nobody. There would be costume changes. I was the lead singer and dancer. It was a whole thing. I had my own pink Barbie boombox that lived in my room, and I would deep clean my room once a week as an excuse to play music loudly and sing along. Vocal stimming in the form of singing has always been my preferred method of existing, and therefore my brain soaks up music at maximum speed because it is my safe place. I also grew up with the privilege of getting to semi-regularly see some national tours come through the Providence Performing Arts Center, and I truly did think that that was a regular thing that every child did. I didn't think it through until pretty much late elementary school. I also started piano lessons in 2nd grade, and I did them until I was a sophomore in high school. I never practiced once, but I did take lessons. When I was in 5th grade, my music teacher did a unit on Broadway musicals, and we learned about Wicked, and I was like, I feel like I saw that show once, or like I heard of it or something. And I found the CD for it, I put it in my pink Barbie boombox, and rather than weekly room cleaning concerts, it was daily, if not several times a day. I lived for that music. I could never decide if I was Elphaba or if I was Glinda, so I would just play both. Looking back, that's very funny to me because now I know that I'm gender fluid and autistic, and both of these identities are equally me in completely different, like, depending on the day and the moment, and I can sing both. Baby me always dreamed of being the first person ever to have played both Elphaba and Glinda in different productions, but you know, for what it's worth, just manifesting into the universe. I'm still down for that. I definitely want to play Elphaba first though, and I also think that Fiyero would be very fun, and let's have a trans Fiyero. But I digress. Basically, I fell in love with that soundtrack, full-on special interest, hyperfixation, slightly out of control. It was a time. And as a result of that, at the end of the year, I auditioned for a prestigious children's chorus program in my area, and I got in. So in 6th grade, I started my first real form of vocal education. This is where I learned how to sing healthily. I learned that the screamy kind of sound, like alphabet, was not a good sound, and I had to have a very light and airy tone. And I learned how to blend, and I learned a lot of music theory, and it was really, really great. I did 7 years with them. I taught one of the younger courses for a bit. I got to perform at Carnegie Hall. I was a soloist on 2 albums. I did lots of sign language interpretation stuff. It was a lot of time out of every week, but I learned very quickly, and I really, really loved it. But that being said, even though it was my safe and happy place, I did really struggle there as well. Did I tell myself I was fine the whole time because I didn't want to not like my safe space? Oh, absolutely. But looking back, I had a really difficult time. First of all, it's common for directors to yell directions while you're singing something or while people around you are talking or whispering. And I always used to sit in the back, so I was too far away to lip read. And I have a pretty severe auditory processing disorder, which means that I often missed what she had said and then would do things wrong or be confused or left out. It was pretty common for me to get in trouble for talking when I shouldn't have been. And while I was a talkative kid, most of the time I was just genuinely trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And because I am an anxious human, after a few times of being reprimanded, I kind of just gave up and stopped asking, and I began to use context clues to try and figure out what was happening. Over time, I got used to the rhythms of rehearsal and at observing the behavior of people around me to get the context clues I needed to do the right thing. But it was always a struggle, really until the last couple of years that I did it. Especially because she would give us assignments every week of what to work on or what to memorize for the next week, and I very frequently got the wrong song or the wrong direction or missed pieces of it, and it would just accidentally come to rehearsal unprepared, which you simply did not do. So that got me in trouble a lot too for the first year or two. But after that, I would sit down, I would memorize all the music on my own after the first rehearsal so that I would never be underprepared again because I'd already done all the work ahead of time. It also made the sight reading work a lot easier because I could see how the notes translated into the actual notes on the page and the rhythms on the page since I already knew the melody. So I, again, backwards taught myself things, not even realizing it. Another thing that made rehearsals difficult for me was my dyspraxia, because motor function takes more conscious effort for me than other people. So the act of finding a place to write down an assignment and starting to write down the assignment was distracting me from being able to use my focusing energy on figuring out what she was saying to us. I'm very glad this is easier for me now. This is all kind of second nature to me at this point. But when I was little, it truly felt insurmountable. And I didn't know why I struggled with it either, so I felt stupid that I couldn't follow along like everybody else could until I figured out my own system, and then I ended up being more prepared than the rest of them were. But another part of the dyspraxia and auditory processing and focus issues is that we would do a lot of sight reading drills where we had the notes on the page and we had to sight read them in solfege, that's the do re mi thing, and conduct at the same time and do the hand signs for the solfege, which in all fairness, made everybody's brains explode a little bit, but I was like physically incapable of doing all those things at once back then. Just the motor control of conducting when I was younger took most of my brain energy. So then having to figure out where do was in the specific key signature, sight read the notes correctly with the correct syllables, and conduct. I couldn't do any of these things separately. So if I did, I think if you gave me one of those exercises now and told me to do all the things at once, I think I could probably do it, but not for more than like 5 minutes before my focus would give out. I think that now I would see it as a fun challenge rather than a frustrating embarrassment. But back then it was devastating. Anyway, the third and most pressing problem was that I passed out a lot. I was dizzy all the time. I in fact passed out during my first concert. That was terrible. It was because I didn't have enough calories in my body, but I didn't know that at the time. So then I began to associate the anxiety with passing out with singing, and that would make me sing more anxiously and use my breath less well, which would then make me more dizzy. And it was a whole self-fulfilling prophecy. I kind of continued this for 4 years and just kind of managed it, I guess. I got used to a certain level of dizzy just every day. But when I was a sophomore in high school, my migraines got really bad and I started to go to a neurologist. We found out I had POTS. So that made sense, and I was told to increase my salt intake by a lot and stand up more carefully and a few other tiny things that made quite the difference for my life. I also decided that the frequencies of sound from singing in a massive choir did not in fact hurt my head, solely because I decided that they wouldn't. Which weirdly worked, and they still don't hurt my head very much. I also went to physical therapy for a while where I learned how to stand up properly for my wacky body, because while it looks the same on the outside, I have to think about positioning all my bones differently to get to that point, if that makes any sense. Talking through all of this makes me realize how grateful I am that most physical movement is second nature to me now, and I don't have to think for an aggressively long time about doing a thing before doing it anymore, because it was such a pain and it was so exhausting. Anyway, back to the vocal bit. I had a really great sound. I was really proud of my voice, but I also wanted to be able to do more than just the classic boy choir sound, because I used to be able to scream sing Elphaba and now I couldn't. And that bothered me because I don't like having things I can't do, especially when they're part of something I'm really passionate about. Back for a chance to start over and rewrite an ending or two for the girl that I knew. And that was literally the only reason I started voice lessons, because when I started them, I was going to be a teacher and I wasn't going to do any music stuff after graduation. I'm going to input a clip of what I sounded like as a choir kid here. One true joy with that unfurled water I will also link the album that I'm on as a soloist with a few other kids in the description for you if nerdy choir stuff is your jam. It is one of my favorite choral pieces of all time, and I still count myself very lucky that I got the chance to be a part of it. But anyway, so I started voice lessons. I went, hey voice teacher, I want to be able to belt my face off. And she's like, interesting, let's figure this out. Yep, and we worked for 3 years trying to do that. And while I definitely improved, I did feel like I was hitting wall after wall. Like I cognitively knew what I needed to do and how to do it, but I could not actually physically do it. And I did not understand what the issue was, and it was wildly frustrating to me. And I spent so much time in lessons, and she kept explaining the same things over and over again, and trying to explain them in different ways, and my brain could not process that into actual technique. And at the same time, I was spending way more hours a week in rehearsal doing choir voice than I was in voice lessons for not choir voice, so I just kind of kept slipping back into old habits without realizing it. There's nothing to do right now but try. But then, there was 1 week of spring break or something, I don't know. My parents were both working like all day every day for a week, and I decided to have a little conservatory time to myself. And I spent half the day every single day just messing around with my voice, just to play with acoustics, play with sounds, see what I was actually capable of doing. And that's when I decided to see what would happen if I just, I don't know, did what my voice teacher always told me, let go of the fear of sounding bad or of my voice cracking or anything else, and just kind of let go and go for it. And that's when I learned what breath support was. You know, 4 years after I'd been trying to do that in choir. Was it the most healthy or pleasant to listen to sound? No, it was not. It was fully just screaming. All back for a chance to start over and rewrite an ending or two for that girl that I knew. But it was a step. And it made me realize that I could have breakthroughs and I could improve. And that, because singing is so precious to me, that I struggle learning how to do it around other people because it's so precious. And it was always the one thing I was really good at, and having other people critique me on that was really difficult for my self-esteem because it's like the one thing I've always been good at. So I decided it was time to start critiquing myself instead. So I began recording myself every time I would just play around vocally just to see what it sounded like, what sounds I liked, what ones I didn't, where to change things, how to go about that. And I started to listen to other vocals with a more critical lens to figure out what sounds I liked, what sounds I didn't like, and skills I wanted to have. And that's how I realized that I really like the savory, resistant feeling of most bass and tenor Broadway leads, or baritone, there's not really bass Broadway leads, that I like long, clean sounds with fast vibrato at the end, kind of like a Disney princess, that I want to be able to put in some heavy metal style grit and vocal overdrive every now and then, that I need a melt your face off belt, but one that sounds like I have complete control over it and what that sounds like, and everything in between. But due to the fact that I spent most of my time in choir rehearsal, at school, in voice lessons, learning to drive, or at work, because I had like 3 jobs then, I simply did not have the time to work on my voice the way that I really wanted to. So I did just a little bit every now and then as I had time, and I got to a point where I was honestly quite happy with where my voice was. And then I moved to college, and I discovered the beauty of practice rooms, free time, and I also started dating somebody who loved when I sang for them. So I made a lot of progress that semester and a half. What do I do with that? Oh God, what if when he sees me, I like him and he knows it? What if he opens up a door and I can't close it. What happens then? And singing for somebody else regularly who did not know a lot about music and asked a lot of questions about the process and whatever opened my eyes to a lot of habits I had that I didn't even realize I had, such as my vocal tic that was destroying my voice a little bit. And if you don't know what a tic is, it's an involuntary muscle movement caused by neurological stuff happening. There are simple tics and complex tics. Simple tics are that's one. Really common in people with autism and or ADHD. Complex tics are categorized as Tourette syndrome. I have simple tics, such as head twitches like that one, jaw twitches, throat clearing or coughing, hard blinking and flinches. They're not dangerous. They're generally pretty rare for me unless I'm around someone who tics a lot, talking about ticking, having a serious flashback, or I'm super, super exhausted. I almost never experience them when I'm on stage or when I'm performing. I usually experience them most when I need to stim or do something physical to get out energy or cope with something, and I'm not able to do so, so my body overrides that and then makes that energy release involuntary. So basically, when I was really young and I was anxious about singing without passing out, my body decided to create a tic to make that easier to handle, and because it was involuntary, I didn't even notice it was happening, and for some reason, neither did anybody else. The tic being involuntary coughs and throat clearing. And that obviously inflames the vocal tract if you do it enough times, and it makes your voice much more tired, which makes it hard to make any solid major vocal progress because I was never at full healthy voice, and when I would try new things to mess around and inevitably mess up a bit, it would be even more of an issue vocally than if I didn't have a tic. What's that word again? Street, up where they walk, up where they run, up where they stay all day in the sun, wandering free, wish I could be part of your world. And this tic really only happens when I'm singing. It doesn't really appear any other time. And do I think almost every day about where I would vocally be today if I had extinguished this tic some years earlier? Yes, I do. But you know what? We're here and we're doing it. I've spent 3 years working on this. It's still not gone. I don't think it ever will be, but I'm at a point where I can sort of control when it happens. I can turn it into depth. I can turn it into grit in my sound, so it's safer now. And also my tone is better, so I can sing around congestion and around sore throats and sound the same no matter what, so it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to warm-ups and stuff, I replaced it with a mini siren like the I do that instead rather than a which is a warm-up rather than a breaking your throat cough. I cannot express how hard it is to train yourself out of a tic. It's kind of like teaching your body to stop sneezing or stopping the world's worst case of hiccups, but a constant battle for years long, and it's horrible. So as horrible as that person that I was dating turned out to be, their innocent comment of, oh, it wouldn't be a Sydney performance without that little cough at the beginning, really changed the game for me. And also, while we're on the topic of them being a horrible person, this is when I got really sick and brain damage happened and my body forgot how to digest food and I almost died, and I spent 6 months regaining the ability to walk and to eat and everything else. Not a good time. However, as we've spoken about before, I spent most of recovery just kind of listening to music because I did not know what else to do with myself because I couldn't do anything. And as a result, once I was functional again, I was way better at music than I had ever been before. Like, my brain just thought in music, and it was wild. In regards to vocal improvement, I didn't make much considering I had virtually no muscle mass anywhere in my body built up, and I was a little busy with other goings on. Also, it was a pandemic, so everybody was working from home in our house. I couldn't really practice loud singing without disturbing anybody, so it just kind of wasn't worth it. And then just before going abroad was kind of like my first time like in person at school since pandemic, since brain damage. I got a back brace, and I've talked about on this channel about how much of a lifesaver that was for me, but it made moving healthily so much easier. And I also started breathing slightly differently and economizing my air differently, which made singing easier and also made life in general quite a lot easier. I expected to make a ton of vocal progress abroad. What actually happened was I was reminded how much I hate learning things in classroom settings. My anxiety spiked, my vocal tic returned, and I also ended up losing a lot of muscle mass after a series of allergic reactions in combination with anxiety. So it was more of a learning skills through osmosis to keep in my back pocket situation, if that makes any sense. And then last spring I made a lot of progress in the sense of tonal quality, and arguably what I was singing was of good enough quality that I would have considered myself done. I could have considered myself done. This is where I belong. Beneath the clear white blue here, I feel completely new here in this world above. But I still couldn't belt my face off with ease, and I wanted to figure out how to do that. So I knew I was not done. And that kind of brings us to a few months ago. I realized that for my show, I need to get a lot more muscle mass going on, just given the nature of the physical work that I want to be able to do. So I figured out what accessible exercise looks like for me. I started working out regularly. I do 30 sit-ups every night before bed, and I've been doing that for like 6 months straight. And one day when I was having a bad day, I decided to go to a practice room and try to scream sing a song because I just needed to get out my energy. And suddenly I was able to do it. Just out of the blue, no problem.
and though I never show it, I'd be so happy I could melt.
So I went back several times a week to really hone that skill to get it to a point where I feel like now that I've decided I hate teaching and do want to do Broadway, I would be at that level to the best of my ability, and also make it safe and healthy so I could do it 8 times a week if I needed to, or daily. And can I do it now? Yes, I can. It will for sure improve because at this point I make progress very quickly just because I know how I learn and how to get things to click and keep my skills going and constantly doing micro adjustments. And also because I'm like at the stage of making micro adjustments that make major differences.
Can add to my generous supply. Add to my generous supply.
But now that I can do what I've always wanted to do, I'm not getting frustrated as much, so I'm doing it more, and it's more of a relaxing break from work rather than work itself. So in regards to ways I've taught myself, as I discovered with everything else I've learned in the school system, I learned things backwards. I need to take stock of where I'm going and where I am right now, and some things that might help me to get from A to B, but algorithmically mess around by myself until I figure out how to get from A to B. And voice has been kind of the same for me. I knew that the best way to get the vocal tone that I wanted was to get to a point where I could sing literally anything and I could shift around different tones and whatnot. And that way I could take elements from every different style to help me in figuring out what I wanted my voice to sound like at the end of the day. So I looked at the end goal, here are the different people I want to be able to do impressions of, and then figure out how to make a voice that is a combo of all of these. And so I started by doing impressions of all of them, copying the way that they move their mouths and how I think that they approach tonal quality and going over the top about it. I got around my constant need to have everything sound controlled and perfect and pretty because it's just a silly impression. It's different. I'm not trying to make beautiful music, I'm trying to do an impression of somebody. I also played around with roles I'd never get to play, and other genders as well, and then I recorded them, and I listened to them, and I learned that some things sound ugly in my head and amazing out loud. I also learned what both sounded and felt healthy and what didn't, and in my downtime I would listen through these recordings and my muscle memory would keep working on reminding my body how I went about making those sounds. I now understand everything my voice teacher was explaining to me years ago because I would explain it in the same way, even though back then I didn't understand what the heck it meant. And I also now understand that it's not a choir voice on one side and a Broadway voice on the other. They're all the same voice, and I use elements of each thing to support each other. And I think that I spent so long being like, I can't have a choir voice, I need to separate myself from that I refused to use those skills to support my other skills and made my own training way harder than it ever needed to be. But you know what? That's all part of the learning process. So sure, if I noticed my tick years earlier, I'd probably be way more advanced now, but I try not to get caught up in the shoulds and the coulds and instead just be excited about how far I've come and how much I've been through to get to this point. A point where I can walk into a practice room, sing Defying Gravity as a warm-up without issue, take a deep breath, and then just go on with my day. Because I couldn't do that 6 months ago. That is so cool. So I'm gonna leave you with some clips of things that I've sung in the last few weeks that I'm really proud of. I will have to keep them kind of short so this video doesn't get copyright claimed, but yeah, I hope this was helpful on some level or cathartic on some level. If you have any questions or whatever, you're welcome to drop them in the comments. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.
I can feel her waiting just beyond the pale horizon, singing out a melody too lovely to withstand, and her voice is there as dust is falling, and her voice is there as dawn steals by, pure and bright, it's always near, all day, all night, and still I hear it calling. Tell them how I defying gravity. I'm lying high and defying gravity, and soon I'll match them in renown. And nobody in all of us, no wizard that there is or was, is ever gonna bring me down. Clear the slate and start over. Try to quiet the noises in your head. We can't compete with all that. So what if it's us? What if it's us and only us? And what came before won't count want anymore or matter. Can we try that? It's not fair to deny me of the Christ I bear that you gave to me. You, I don't know. I'll be your something to hold on to. Hold on to me. Hold on to me. This is as free as I'll ever feel. And my heart feels complete. Let's never leave this room. How about we stay here till finals? I'll go to school forever. I'll take out a dementedly huge high interest loan. 'Cause I'm changing my major to